Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Lannon, and this is my presentation for my risk factors and fitness test. Starting off with some basic personal information, I am 5'5", I weigh 135 pounds, I'm 19 years old, and I'm a female. To first get into things, I'm starting with the graph on pages 34 and 33. This is whether or not you participate in regular physical activity. I fall into page 34, meaning that I do participate in regular activity. I also have no known diseases, nor do I have any signs or symptoms of anything, meaning that I fall into the left-hand side on page 34. Getting into the risk factors, I am 19 years old, so age is not a risk factor for me. Age is only a risk factor for you when you are a female if you're over the age of 55. Family history also is not a risk factor for me. I have no first-degree relatives that have ever had any problems with heart attacks or anything like that. Cigarette smoking is not a risk factor for me. I'm not a current smoker. I do not live with any smokers, nor do I spend time around people who are smokers or have quit smoking in the last 6 months. Physical inactivity is also not a risk factor for me. It is only a risk factor if you exercise less than 30 minutes, 3 days of the week for less than the last 3 months. My activity usually lasts about an hour, 5 to 6 days a week, and has been for years and years. My BMI is 22.46, which means obesity is not a risk factor for me either. Obesity is only a risk factor for you if you have a BMI greater than or equal to 30. My blood pressure was 125/74, meaning that hypertension is not a risk factor for me. Hypertension is only a risk factor if you have a systolic measure greater than 140 or a diastolic greater than 90. For my dyslipidemia, I also did not count this as a risk factor. I only have my total cholesterol level, so that's what I had to use. My level was 170, and it's only a risk factor if it's greater than or equal to 200. Diabetes, I did have to count as a risk factor. I had to count this because I do not know my fasting glucose levels, so I had to take a hit on this one. My HDL, again, is unknown. I didn't know my HDL or my LDL, so I did have to count this risk factor, or I didn't get the bonus point here, I should say. That brings my total risk factors to 1. I had to count my diabetes again because that information was unknown. My concerns with my risk factors really is more of a question. I just would like to know if diabetes actually is a risk factor that I have, so it just would be nice to know those fasting glucose levels. So now moving into my fitness test, my BMI is 22.48, which has me fall into the normal category. My percent body fat is 17.9. I didn't quite make that 17.6 cutoff, so I had to drop down to the 18.4, which puts me at good with a 70%. My VO2 max is 47.4. Again, didn't quite meet that 48.3, so I had to drop down to the 46.5. This still gives me an excellent ranking in the 80th percentile. My grip strength on my right side is 52, my left side is 55. This gives me a combined total score of 107, which for my age group and sex puts me at an excellent ranking. My bench press was 90 pounds. 90 divided by 135 is 0.67. Didn't quite make that 0.7 cutoff, dropped down to the 0.65. That gives me a good ranking and a 60th percentile. My leg press was 195 pounds. 195 divided by 135 is 1.44. That puts me at average in a 50th percentile. My push-up test, I did 40 push-ups. For women, anything greater than 30 is excellent, which gives me an excellent score on my push-up test. My sit and reach was 41, which again, for my age and sex, gives me an excellent score. My areas of concern for my fitness tests are definitely my upper and body strength when it comes to that bench press and leg press. I grew up physically active, but I never grew up in a training room atmosphere where I was working on bench press and leg press. So a 60% and a 50% based on what I scored with everything else was low. So those are definitely areas of concern for me. I did have some areas that surprised me, and I think these are due to growing up as an athlete. I grew up as a gymnast. So obviously my flexibility is higher than the average, which gave me an excellent score. My push-ups, I'm just used to doing that kind of stuff. My grip strength, I was really surprised by, and I definitely think that is from being on the bars at gymnastics. So that score was really great. And all in all, that wraps up my presentation for my risk factors and fitness tests.